Good morning. Well, I'm delighted to be able to speak to you this morning about recent fieldwork at Blossom Street. Blossom Street is located on Norton Folgate, which is one of the roads, the principal roads leading into the City of London, and is referred to in the title of the talk. The actual development site itself incorporates the footprints of about 15 different buildings, so it's quite a large area, and we were lucky that we managed to excavate most of it before the first lockdown, although unfortunately that also means that we don't have many of the finds back yet. But I can tell you that two of my fabulous colleagues are still covering the odd bit of watching brief down there, so the site is actually ongoing. So just in case you're unsure where Norton Folgate is, if you follow the bus down to the right, which is heading south, you reach Bishopsgate and Liverpool Street Station. And if you go the other direction up to the north, to the left, you reach Shoreditch High Street. To the extreme northern extent of the photo, so the extreme left-hand side there, that's Bishopsgate Goods Yard. And obviously we have the live railway lines between that and the site itself. And I think the district line passes through there. Over to the right, you see the magnificent spire of the Christ Church, designed by Hawksmoor, and that was built in the early 18th century, and that defines the southeastern corner of Spitalfields Market. So just to give you an idea how close we actually are to the market there. And then in the extreme distance to the east, you can see Canary Wharf. Just to see the site in plan form, you have Norton Folgate going north-south to our west, to the left of S1. So the whole site obviously is S1, S2 and S3, but the main bit, and the bit I can share with you today, is S1. And Blossom Street itself is running north-south on the eastern side of S1. This is essentially the same plan of S1, but divided up into areas, as you can see there, alphabetical areas, which would be much easier to refer to in the text. So what I'll try and do is refer to this map in between pictures of features. There are three main areas of standing buildings that are being kept into the new development, and they're in grey there. You can see 12 to 13 Blossom Street, 16 to 19 Norton Folgate, which had wash houses, early 19th century wash houses, which are apparently quite rare, and they've been kept, and then the pub in the southeastern corner. And this is Blossom Street itself, and these warehouses date from the 1820s, and you can see the cobbled street there as well, but some people might actually recognise it from somewhere else. And here it is featured in Mary Poppins Returns. I haven't actually seen this myself, but I think I might just so I can see Blossom Street. Just to put our site in a wider landscape context, over to the west, on the other side of Norton Folgate, was the site of Principal Place. This is now the London headquarters for Amazon, but the footprint of the site revealed 44 Roman burials, as well as one of the best prehistoric finds that we've ever had in London. And that is this, quite a few sherds from a Neolithic pot. And I think we found traces of dairy products on the inside of this pot. But I think the sheer number and survival of these sherds is pretty unique, certainly for London. As I said before, we're very close to Spitalfields Market. That's just the south of us, and that got its name from St Mary's Spital, which was a priory and hospital founded in the 12th century and carrying on into the 14th. And this plan shows the remains that we know of from the priory precinct, overlaid on top of our S1, S2 and S3 site plan there. And if you head south from this map, you hit the remains of the chapel itself. The chapel was a two-storey building, and you can visit the remains that are there. You can still see the crypt if you go down these stairs. And this is in Bishop's Square, which is just at the edge of Spitalfields Market. And here's me in that crypt about 23 years ago. And I don't know what's more worrying about this picture, the fact that I had to clamber across all those remains to clean them, or the fact that I ever thought it was a good idea to wear white trousers. And for those who are interested, all of the results now from the excavation have been published. This shows the cover of the medieval remains, and we've now just published the Roman period as well. So to return to our own site of Blossom Street, the earliest remains that we found, I'm going to show you in the next slide, which will be in area B, pretty much in the centre there, and we'll be looking over to the west. And I believe this to be at least one of the earliest features that we did have on site. You can see there that there's a kind of circle of post holes. You have to ignore the feature that's top left there. That's the backfilled cut for a post-medieval drain. But you can see there is a definite circle of post holes to the right of that. And I do think this is possibly remains of a prehistoric building. About 5 metres to the east of what I think was a building, and we got this, which is the remains of 2 horses. And we have been lucky enough to get a date back for this from a radiocarbon date we did at the time, and this is dating to the late Iron Age or very early Roman period. In the later Roman period, we did get the remains of 6 human burials, and these were pretty much in a kind of line going east-west, which was quite different from the group over at Principal Place, which seemed much more random. So we're not sure if these maybe were part of the edge of perhaps a property line or something like that. And we found these burials up where pretty much where area A meets area C, that red line between them. It was they were kind of in that area. And one of the individuals had 2 pots buried with them, so we should be able to get a really good date back on those very soon. Other than the burials, the only real Roman features we had, which is what you would expect from the site just being outside where the Roman town was, were roadside ditches and quarry pits. The first area of the site that we got to excavate in 2019 was in the courtyard of the Waterport, which a pub which some of you may remember. And it was named after John Taylor, who was a poet in the late 16th century. He was called the Waterport because, as well as writing poetry, he also was a ferryman taking people backwards and forwards across the Thames. And just to orientate you with our plan, you can see the pub in the southeastern corner there. And this is the courtyard area of the pub itself, which we went on to excavate. And it used to be the smoking area, and little did I think that one day I'd actually be digging up the area. So if you keep your eyes on the doors at the end, going into the next slide, you can see the same double doors here as excavation is underway, and it looks pretty different. And below the courtyard floor and the remains of some 18th century structures, we got these fantastic medieval walls. There's actually 2 phases of build there, but they were absolutely brilliant, and they were both running north-south. This shows the eastern wall very clearly. You can see the foundation there, and the actual, the beautiful face of the wall itself, made from Reigate stone and flint. And this shows the western wall, which had 2 separate builds to it. But I also wanted to put this in because it shows Joe Brooks, who's a supervisor at PCA. And we did have a number of PCA colleagues come and work with us for a while. And I'm really pleased about the relationship between all the units, actually, that we can borrow and lend staff if we need to. This also shows remains of another wall, which was to the east of our eastern wall. And you can see a definite curve in this wall. So we think it may be related to perhaps an absidal wall, which again has very much flavour of being as part of the priory. We also had a number of medieval ditches, but I wanted to put this photo in anyway because I think if it was in if there was a competition for the neatest section, I think I'd probably put this forward for being the winner. So just to orientate you again, those massive walls were in area K, and the picture of the ditch was in I, and the next slide will be in I as well. And that shows this fabulous chalk-lined cesspit. We also had medieval remains up in area A, where we'd had the Roman burials before. And you can see an L-shaped medieval wall here, and where each of my colleagues is the base of where there would have been an arch. And this photo's looking in the other direction, but you can still clearly see the rectangular bases of each arch. And this is looking west again towards the main road. Looking in the other direction again, on the right of the picture you can see the bases of the arches again. And then to the north of these we have this fantastic, enormous ditch which may have marked perhaps the edge of a property of one of these, which would have been quite grand medieval buildings on the main road going into the town. But in the backfill of this ditch we had loads and loads of leather shoes, so we should be able to get really good dates when we get those back as well. So that large ditch was running east-west up in area A, and the next slide you'll see will be in B. And here also running east-west, whether it was the remains of another arched foundation. The chalk, you can see remains of some brickwork, and that was showing reuse into the Tudor period. And here's a close-up of one of the arches looking south. Just a fantastic thing to find. And this shows the position of that same wall in the whole site. I really like pictures like this that give a kind of broader landscape, showing both old and new features. Anyway, the next slide I'm going to show you will be to the left of the blue lifting tower at the far side there. And this was an east-west ditch, which we think dated to the early medieval period, and you can see remains of revetting there along its northern edge. And this shows a kind of earlier phase of that same ditch. We also had the remains of another couple of medieval walls, and this was in a much smaller and more difficult area to excavate. As you can see, this was in the southwestern corner of the site in area H. So you can see area H here, bottom left, and the next picture I'm going to show you will be in G, just a little bit to the north there in green. And you can see here there are two walls which we believe to be Tudor in date, but obviously reusing elements from medieval buildings. You can see the fabulous, looks like window edge, the sort of architectural shapes there in the Reigate green sandstone. And I'm pleased to be able to say that what we managed to salvage of the Reigate on site, we could give to the Tower of London for use for repairs in the Tower of London. So that was brilliant. From the same area of the site, we found this jeton, which is Henry IV of France and his wife Marie de Medici, and this was from Nuremberg and dates to around 1602. East of the site, we found this chalk-lined cesspit, again reused in the Tudor period, so we're going from medieval to Tudor. And what was special about this was the marks on the chalk blocks themselves. Each row had its own number, and all the numbers were the same. So you can see a tier there with 3 marks on it all the way around, and then the one above has 4, and then 5, and the top one there has none, which gives it a kind of prefabricated look, like somebody had gone into a cesspit shop and said, I quite like that one. The only thing about that is the chalk blocks don't actually work that well together in some places. So I'm not entirely sure yet what the scorings mean. Other lovely finds were this lovely little glazed whistle, this fabulous watering can, you can see the holes at the bottom there, and this strange Tudor brick which had a kind of couple of gouges in it and this kind of black coating, but we're not entirely sure what it was used for. You can see the right hand one's broken at the weak point where it had been gouged out. But we still got to find out what this was used for. Perhaps the most amazing Tudor find that we came across was this, which looked industrial, looked like a row of about 5 ovens. Surrounding each feature you can see this kind of layer of charcoal, and the wall that's kind of in the middle there is that same wall that you saw in area B with the arches before. And here it's been reused as part of this kind of oven development. And to the south of these features, we had 3 different phases of Tudor Road which we found again to the south in other areas of the site. But just to get this kind of Tudor landscape was absolutely fantastic. Back in Area H, which was the southwestern corner of the site, we had again reused medieval material, this time these lovely little tiles, and in a 16th century drain, which had a 17th century rebuild. So just so everyone knows where they are, and the ovens were in B, and we're now looking at a drain base in H. And looking at that drain again, a number of tiles stood out, but particularly this one, which you can see looks like a sort of dog dragon, and was just completely remarkable, really lovely to find. So now going from the 16th century into the 17th century, in the foreground here, this brick paving, we think dates to the 17th century and would have been part of the kind of backyard area of buildings that would be fronting the main road. So for the kind of 200 years, 17th to the 19th centuries, we've got the same sort of pattern and the same kind of property boundaries. At the front, we've got remains of footprints of actual buildings, and kind of in the foreground there, we've got features you'd identify with backyard areas, such as soakaways, cesspits, and the occasional well. We're also seeing reuse of structures in this period as well. Here you can see the remains of a 16th century cesspit, but it's been replaced with a brick lining, so the horn cores have been replaced to carry on into the 17th century. And here's another cesspit which has been backfilled with some domestic rubbish, an absolutely brilliant feature to be able to dig. And a lot of these features, because the property lines remained the same for a couple of hundred years, so you were getting an awful lot of reuse of features. In this barrel well backfill, my colleague David found the remains of two wooden bowling balls, which again we think would date to the 17th century. And we also found this fabulous wooden butter pat. This is Elder Street, and this view is from the entrance to the site. And what's fantastic about this street, and at the bottom running east-west, is Falgate Street. And these buildings were all built in the 1720s, and of course are still standing. So some of the features that we're finding on the site would have been contemporary with those, so that was kind of like extra special. So the street we were just looking at then was Elder Street, which you can see on the right-hand side of S3, and the entrance to the site was just on the corner there of S3. So if you follow Elder Street down, at the base there's Falgate Street, so the next photo I'll show you will be of that. A lot of you will probably already be aware of Falgate Street because at number 18 is Dennis Sever's house, the outside of which is shown here, and just along from there is the Batty Langley Hotel, and both of them have beautiful 18th century kind of restored interiors. This is a room in Dennis Sever's house, and of course it's shut at the moment, but it's well worth a visit, and I think you can only view it by appointment, but highly recommended. And if you want to immerse yourself more fully in the kind of 18th century dream, you can stay at Batty Langley Hotel, and that's Mr. Langley on the wall there. But yeah, another kind of fine architectural and inspirational decor renovation. One of the buildings which didn't survive the renovation is the Savoy Grill, or else our Area G, if you remember. Not to be confused with the Savoy along the Strand. Just to show you exactly where that is, that's Area G. And on that part of the site, this was built in 1875, the East London Aquarium, which also had a menagerie and waxworks exhibition. And an absolutely fantastic poster advertising it, I'm sure you'll agree. Going around clockwise, entrance, bear and monkey room, lions performing daily, a rifle gallery and bird shows, which doesn't sound great for the birds, but cave with illuminated views, the remains of which sadly we didn't find, waxworks, fountain and tank with seals and apparently loads of fish as well, and then theatre performances as well. And from the City Press in 1884 is this excerpt about school children visiting the East London Aquarium and each being presented with a toy and refreshment. Unfortunately, tragedy struck later that same year when there was an enormous fire at the aquarium, and the majority of the animals actually burnt to death, which is like awful, really. Even the enormous fish tank, the fish didn't even survive, so it must have been terrible. Um, uh, I would like to quickly thank Spitalfields Life for these pictures, which are really fabulous. But this is so tragic that, and I really don't want to end on this note, so I'm going to go from burning animals to burning kilns. And we had a couple of these kilns in the same area of the site as the Tudor ovens, so that's probably significant. And these dated to the 18th and 19th centuries. And these kilns would have been part of this development from the Good Fire Insurance Map of 1890, an absolutely brilliant map, which shows all of the warehouses and all of the businesses which were on our footprint in the 19th century. So I'd just like to end on that point. That takes us kind of pretty much up to date. So thank you very much indeed.